Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to you, Chief Constable and your team, to this first formal meeting of 2024. You're very welcome. Under new momentum, we come to today's meeting with the positive news of a path to a restored assembly and a new momentum being brought to dealing with issues that impact on our public services and for policing. We have a long list of issues and recommendations to raise with the incoming Justice Minister. These include areas for legislative change arising from reports published, an opportunity to improve how the police, the criminal justice sector, and other public sector services can work together to deal with the pressures currently faced and reduce delays in the system. As a board, we will support you in the continued lobby and resourcing for policing, and we hope that the new executive in their discussions and deliberation recognise the critical role of our policing to our ongoing peace process, society stability, and safety of our community. So, Chief Constable, if I can hand over to you for the opening remarks, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for those opening remarks and the support that you've given us. I just wanted to highlight some issues that I provided in my forward, and just to build on some of those and expand on a few additional pieces of information since I wrote that forward. Obviously, we've had, as you've alluded to, the extremely welcome news of what appears to be a return of the executive. This board, the PSNI, stakeholders, the Secretary of State, the Department of Justice, the government in Westminster are well aware of my position with regards to funding for the PSNI. Yesterday, I wrote to the Secretary of State. I shared that letter with a number of key stakeholders, welcoming the recent developments, but highlighting again the position that this organisation faces with regards to funding. In my forward, I do reflect on the consequences if we do not get the funding that we need with regards to officer numbers, and also, and as this board is aware, my determination to pay the pay award for the police officers and staff for the PSNI. Indeed, with that regard, I'm exploring the legal opportunities that might be available to me. I'm very conscious that courts have always been nervous about making judgments with regards to allocations of spend with regards to public services, but I have statutory duties within the organisation to keep people safe, to safeguard vulnerable groups, as well as an accounting officer function. And that prospect is one that I had not put to one side with regards to making sure that these issues were effectively discussed in a format where proper and more informed decisions could be made around funding for the PSNI. That's against the backdrop, which I've mentioned to this board before, of in the last 12 years, health receiving a budget increase of 70%, education 45%, and justice 3%, of which obviously policing is a considerable part. The decision previously to stop recruitment is one that I well understand. In the current financial envelope, it was inevitable that at some point such a decision had to be made. I have taken the decision, which is in the forward, that we will recommence recruitment in April. There is an affordability issue, but I don't think we can afford not to recruit. I will not allow the organisation to fall below 6,358 officers. We are, as you know, working to ensure that every part of the organisation is leaned and provides the sort of policing that the board require and the people of Northern Ireland deserve, and the PSNI officers and staff want to deliver. So that's I think, significant and welcome turning point for the service. The recruitment of itself will provide a bounce, an injection of positivity to the organisation, and will certainly help morale. One thing I have mentioned previously is that the list of what we have to do only ever gets bigger. Nothing comes off the list in policing. In the forward, I mentioned the introduction of domestic abuse protection orders, and we did some analysis of the introduction of these very important preventative orders, what they will do in tackling domestic abuse is not going to be lost on anybody, but it is going to increase the work of the organisation quite considerably. We've got additional projected costs of £8.5 million. It will lead to more arrests. It will lead to inspectors doing a significant number of applications, we think in the region of 8,000 at court. And I just mentioned that as an example of the additional core business that statutorily we have to do. For me, policing is about protecting people and fighting crime. If, in the backdrop of the welcome developments recently, and hopefully the likelihood of improved funding for the PSNI, but we will continue to do the work led by Ryan Henderson, Assistant Chief Constable, to understand what we are doing that isn't within those core aims that we have of protecting people and fighting crime, to understand what we can do, what we can stop doing, so that we can carry on with our core functions. I was obviously delighted by yesterday's report with regards to tackling paramilitarism, and again, it's not just me making it known publicly and privately around the funding position that this organisation is in. But I note the report's comments that we recommend that the government ensure that Northern Ireland receives funding in 2024 and on a recurrent basis thereafter, which enables the PSNI to provide fair pay awards to officers and staff and recommence officer recruitment and increase headcount to at least 7,500 officers. When I wrote to the Secretary of State yesterday, I explained on the current analysis that police forces use in England and Wales of 3.88 officers per 1,000 population. We should be in the region of 7,400 officers. Now, I would also add to that the complexity of policing in Northern Ireland, which in the HMIC report at the end of last year set out the additionality that's required to police nuances, the difficulties that we have here. We are now doing some work to build on that calculation, and I would expect our headcount that we required to deliver the services that you would want us to deliver to be probably close to 8,000 police officers. And if you look at the numbers we've got and the delivery that we are providing, it is absolutely outstanding, but it cannot be sustained. And that again was outlined in the HMIC report at the end of last year. So there's plenty of reports and signposts, as well as me hopefully advocating in a sensible way the position we're in. And the reason I mention this again before this meeting is I'm obviously aware that discussions will now be happening about how budgets are allocated. And I want to make sure that this organisation is at the forefront of people's thinking. In simple terms, the more I visit officers, and there is a correlation with our sickness and our numbers, because as you go down in numbers and your demand increases, that does affect sickness. That is a well-known, that's a well-known factor. But many officers are saying that they simply can't afford to be part of the PSNI, officers and staff. We have around about 600 people leaving the organisation each year. Around about 350 of those are police officers. The recruitment that we're going to do is seeking to retain the headcount that we're currently at. So the recruitment will effectively keep us the headcount we've got, but we need to increase that headcount. Okay. Looking on the good news in the forward, I do talk about the services that were delivered during the Christmas period, some outstanding policing to make sure that people had a peaceful Christmas, our Operation Season's Greetings, lots of awareness campaigns because we often get spikes in domestic abuse, lots of work with young people around domestic abuse and respect to one another, and some very, very impressive proactive policing across the organisation with regards to specifically in the last 12 months, but especially in December, drug seizures, which have been record breaking. I will say I was immensely proud that we had 3 police officers and member of police staff recognised in the King's New Year's Honours. And I think that's testament to the work that goes on unseen by the men and women of the PSNI. I'm delighted to say that tomorrow we have the first in a number of long service and good conduct ceremony events to celebrate the decades of public service that our men and women are giving. Unfortunately, we've not had any of those events for some time, but we are recommencing them and catching up with those awards that we've not given previously. There are a number of other award ceremonies to recognise and celebrate and thank our staff for what they do that are now scheduled for the next 12 months as well, which we will be inviting the board to. You may have seen since the last meeting, since the last board meeting, it's been reported that I went to visit the Caudry family following the coroner's report into the tragic deaths of Michael and Maureen in May 2017. I have to say the Caudry family are a remarkable family. What they are doing to raise awareness around mental health and to ensure that health trusts, the PSNI and all agencies work in a better and more cohesive way to recognise and understand the measures that need to be taken around mental health need to be recognised and celebrated. We're working with the Caudry family because the coroner's report, which was an outstandingly well-written report, highlighted a number of measures that we need to put in place to make sure that we learn the lessons from that particular incident. And I want to assure this board, and I certainly I'm sure the family are aware, we are determined to learn each of those lessons. And in fact, the family are going to assist us by overseeing our progress in the next 12 months. You'll also be aware that through media reporting, I met the Quinn family, and again, another remarkable family who've been through the most tragic loss with the murder of Glenn. I had a private meeting, but I want to assure the board, and there was a police ombudsman's report with regards to the police action at the time that Glenn was murdered, and that we accept that we got things wrong. We are learning those lessons. I am in touch with all the officers involved to make sure that this organisation listens and acts on areas where we needed to improve. What I can say that all the officers in those cases who came to work on those given occasions came to do their very best. And as an example of that, when I went to see the Caudry family, on the way down there, I telephoned 4 officers who had just been involved in an incident where a young woman was trying to kill herself and her 1-year-old child. 2 female officers were quite badly assaulted going into the River Foyle, but managed to get the lady and her child out of danger. Now, the reality of policing is, if that lady or her child had died, we would have faced an inquest asking questions about how we reacted. These really are difficult decisions and, complex issues. And of course, I will say, we are the police service. We're not mental health experts. We are training, we are learning, we are listening, but we are not mental health experts. And that particular set of circumstances, that young lady, was a mental health crisis. Overall, what I will say, looking at the HMIC report from the end of last year, looking at the delivery of this organisation with the numbers we've got, conscious of what I've just talked about with regards to the challenges, Northern Ireland remains one of the safest places to live in Great Britain. And now I think that's due to a lot of community factors, the way communities work together, but also it's an indictment of the work of the men and women of the PSNI. But if we don't get the funding we need, the report yesterday, which I very much support and welcome from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee into Paramilitarism and Organised Crime, and it talks about the need for longer-term funding, it calls for that funding to be done quickly, then we won't be able to maintain the performance because the organisation is exhausted that we currently have. So we need to sort these issues out, and the officers and staff need to be paid their pay award, as do other public sector workers. And I know that plea will be heard beyond this board. And I know this board supports that position, for which I'm grateful. So at that point, I will pause and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I'm going to go across my fellow board members for some questions now. I'm going to start with Peter Osborne on HMIC report.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm sure we'll all come back to some of the funding issues at some point as well. Can I ask you, in terms of the HMIC report, amongst other things, it raised an issue of child criminal exploitation on county and non-county lines, but more broadly than that as well. And it seems that the HMIC view on that was out of line with the PSNI perception of it. Do you accept the HMIC findings around child criminal exploitation, including within organised crime in Northern Ireland, and the recommendations? And if not, why not?
So thank you for the question, Peter. I do accept what the HMIC have said, and I've spoken to the author and Lee Freeman, our HMI, about those remarks. And also in the report yesterday by the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, references made to the exploitation of children by paramilitaries and organised crime gangs. I think some of this is a breakdown in communication. Obviously, I'll bring Mark McEwen in, and in fact, any of the team who wish to make comments on this. We know and recognise full well, because we're in those communities, how children are exploited by paramilitaries and organised crime gangs. What we don't see here is the same style of exploitation through county lines that exist in England and Wales. But we simply have another form of organised crime gangs exploiting children. What I welcome in the report yesterday, actually, which built on the theme that was identified in the HMIC report, is that we should review and audit how we are performing in working with partners, how we are using the legislation that's available to us to protect children and keep them away from the clutches of organised crime groups. And that's something I very much welcome. But that's a whole systems approach. That's not just a law enforcement arrest strategy approach. But to reassure you, I think all of us would readily accept that there is a problem and that we need to do more about it. And looking at the report from yesterday, I think it actually gives us, and we've started to do some of this work, as you would expect, it gives us a framework which to build on to do just that. And I've undertaken to Lee Freeman, who was the author of the HMIC report, who made those comments, that at the next PL inspection, he can be reassured that there will be a different proposition when they come. But I think there was something of a communication issue with regards to county lines in Northern Ireland. We recognise the exploitation of children with regards to criminal activity and exploitation. Mark, I don't know if you want to come in there.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And thanks for the question, Peter. I agree with what Chief Constable said. And we've had discussions in this forum and other committees in the past around how county lines became shorthand in Northern Ireland for child criminal exploitation. And we have made the assertion that we don't see it in the same way that it manifests itself in England and Wales around children and young people being used to run drugs across policing jurisdictions to try and subvert law enforcement. I think it is important to say that we do absolutely recognise that children and young people are exploited, whether that's around drug dealing, drug use, child sexual exploitation. We see that in many areas, and often where it involves paramilitary groups, it's confined to a locality as opposed to the county lines type methodology. So we are involved. Public Protection Branch and Organised Crime Branch are represented on a child criminal exploitation steering group. That's co-chaired by Department of Health and Department of Justice. We have support hubs in every district that address young people at risk, and that's been running since its inception in 2015 in Derry City and Strabane. We've commissioned our own analytical profile in relation to child criminal exploitation in order to complete sort of understanding of best practice across the UK, particularly in Yorkshire and Humber regional organised crime units. So we are absolutely looking at what we do and how we can be joined up better on it. But as the chief has said, I have had a conversation myself with HMI, because I do think there's a communication issue about commonality of language, not just in terms of how we do this, but with partners as well, and how we refer to exploitation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Gerry now on a question on the Legacy Act.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for your opening remarks. My question is around legacy. As you will be very aware, the Legacy Act has been brought in against the wishes of all the parties here, and also the victims' families. What I wanted to ask is, are the police expediting disclosure to inquests? As you know, this is a long-going saga. Legacy, there's a cut-off date in May, and people are very worried. Even those who are able to get their cases in are very worried that those cases won't even be dealt with in that period, and a lot of it goes down to disclosure, we've been told.
Yeah, thanks, Gerry. Well, I'm grateful for the question. Everybody in this room knows my, commitment to families who suffered during the Troubles, and to getting them as much information as is available now about what happened. And your question helps me raise an issue with regards to legacy inquests. We have a hard stop on those inquests of the 1st of May, when, unless amended through current appeals to elements of the legacy bill, or subsequently amended by any future government, there won't be any further legacy inquests after the 1st of May, and those that are ongoing on the 1st of May will have to stop. Now, we have got, unfortunately, a position where, because of the amount of work that's required for a number of those inquests, they will not be concluded, I fear, by the May date. I think that's a reality that coroners, legal teams for families, and families themselves are alive to. There is a second issue that concerns me greatly, is there are some inquests that are ongoing where, because there is not a framework, there is not a legal framework to deal with sensitive material, such as you have for civil cases, where you have what's known as a CMP process, a closed material proceedings process, whereby civil cases can deal with material that would be subject to sensitivities. That doesn't exist in inquests. There is a risk that some of those inquests, the coroner may find themselves in a position where they feel the inquest cannot continue. I became aware of that at the end of last year, when I was looking at some specific cases, as you would expect me to do. And I have commissioned legal advice to look at this problem and what we can do about it. So, to reassure you, the first thing we are seeking to do is everything we can to expedite the delivery of material to each of those ongoing inquests in a way that would allow them to be completed. So, even speaking to Crown solicitors, because they are also, that is a potential point of failure because of the number of lawyers they currently have available to do what they need to do with regards to the work that's required. If we can help with the resilience of our lawyers. The barrister that I've asked to look at this has spoken to the outgoing presiding coroner, the incoming presiding coroner, so Justice Humphreys and Justice Rooney, have spoken to barristers representing legacy families, barristers representing the PSNI. And we've got a discussion next week to try and come up with any fixes that we can to assist these families. And the focus, the approach is to get everything done that we can possibly do for those families. But the time scale is not ours. The time scale has been forced upon us, forced upon those coroners conducting those inquests. You'll be aware there were originally 53 inquests that were part of the 5-year plan. The Attorney General added a number of inquests to those. I think there are 8 that fall outside of the time period. So after the Good Friday Agreement, any troubles related deaths are not captured by the bill. So those inquests can continue. But if it assists you, everything that we can do, we are doing to service the needs of the coroners. And whether it's resourcing my time, because I have to do the public interest immunity certification, I make the time and I turn them around immediately. I go through each case very carefully, but there is no delay. So there's no delay from our end. But it felt like, this was what I said to myself before Christmas, I'm going to have to try and do in the next 25 weeks what we've not done in the last 25 years. And frankly, that's not possible. But we're doing what we can. And I want the families to know that we are doing what we can. I will actually bring Ryan in. I met Declan Morgan earlier this week with Ryan and Peter Sheridan, obviously, who are leading the ICRIR, to look at those cases that don't get completed. What's the plan post the date of the 1st of May? And on their website, on the ICRI website, Sir Declan has put out a framework as to how those cases will be dealt with by the Commission. And what I've assured Sir Declan is that the PSNI will give unfettered, unredacted access to the information that the Commission requires for that process. The details of how that will work are yet to be decided. We're waiting to see how the Commission wants to interact with us to get that information. But I'll just bring Ryan in, if I may.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Gerry, for the question. And I think it's just really important, as the Chief Officer with responsibility for legacy, that the families and the board hear me say that I understand how impactful that 1st of May deadline is going to be for families. It must be hugely unsettling, troubling, and worrying, given the faith that they have in the coronial process. And with the support of the Chief Constable, we're determined to do everything we reasonably can to support the coronial process and coroners as they work through what is clearly a very constrained timescale. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the court service and others that are involved in that process. But to reassure you that with the Chief's support, I will be flexing and surging and working as creatively as we can to support that process as well as we can over the coming months. And as the Chief has mentioned, the new legacy body will be forming in the next number of months, as you'd expect. But I know there's legal challenges to that. We have been working to see what that process would be like, and I just want to again reassure you that we're kind of being proactive, positive, open, involved, and want to help make that process as successful as it can be.
I'll just finish with this, and I mean, taking into consideration the report that you have, Chief Constable, and the fact that their recruitment is well down, numbers are well down. I think you gave us a report, maybe the last in one of the committees, that it was down to the number who are actually working on the inquest at the moment is quite small. So I'm taking into consideration the pressures you're talking about, but in the short time that is there, can that be boosted in terms of the number of places, and some of them are legal, who can work in this? I think that's maybe what the family want to know, what between now and May, what extra can be done practically.
So I'm happy to say that, because I went to visit the unit to look at how it works and look at the process map, if that makes sense. There are a number of 6-7 lawyers in there. There are about 60 staff. A lot of this isn't about putting additional staff in there. We are, I think, going to flex that staff to help Crown solicitors, or we're certainly talking to, because that's another point of failure, potentially. The specialism that's required, the subject matter expertise is the thing. What I can assure you is that if we had a reasonable timescale, we would be able to see the effective work that needs to be done. I don't think, and I've asked the question about resources, Gerry, I don't think adding resources is actually going to help us because of the specialist nature of this. And we have invested over the years. There is sufficient resources, I think, in there to deal with that part of the process. We are looking for ways through council to potentially ask questions about taking some of the potential delays out of the system. So one of the things is I do certification around public interest immunity. The ultimate decision is the coroner's on whether that is to be allowed or not. But that certification also goes to the Secretary of State. Now, that might be right. It might need to happen in that way. But that's not something that I think necessarily needs to happen. And we've spoken to the presiding coroner about that. With agreement, that might be some of the timeliness that we can take out of the system to help with this. But this all should have been looked at years ago. And certainly with the clarity that prevailed with the bill, we should have done more to understand the consequences of this. And building on Ryan's comments, I've offered to meet families. What I want to make it clear here is, in a way, in layperson's terms, we could be seen as the bad guys here. We are not the bad guys. We are trying to make sure that this information, all these families, they come from, different communities, that they get the truth of what happened to their loved one through a coronial processes in the way that everybody deserves to get that truth. But because of the incredibly harsh guillotine date of the 1st of May, some of that is simply not going to be achievable, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Kate and a question on educational programmes delivered by PSNI.
Thank you. What efforts are being made, Chief, to prioritise investment in preventative education programmes delivered by PSNI as the Children and Young People Strategy enters its 2nd year amidst budgetary pressures?
Now, I knew I'd get a question I probably couldn't answer, and this is it. Listen, Kate, I understand. We've had conversations. I am a great advocate for proactive preventative policing because of our position, which I think I've set out fairly clearly and starkly. We will become a responsive organisation. We will become an organisation that isn't working as it should be with partners to do those community interventions, that community work. I actually met with some stakeholders around paramilitarism yesterday, and we received £250,000 towards community interventions in that arena. Because of our budgetary issues, we are not able to do the work in that field that I want to do. So that's unfortunately, one of the collateral elements of what we should be doing as an organisation and what we have done well. That's one of the things that we'll have to give, I'm afraid. And that's that. I can't sugarcoat that. It's if people phone 999, they expect us to answer the phone quickly, and they expect us to go and respond to whatever the crisis is. I don't want to be an organisation that can only do that, but that's the reality of what has happened with funding. And by the way, we don't need in-year budgets, 1-year budgets. We need, and again, that's mentioned in the report from yesterday. Again, it's mentioned in the report from the HMIC. Again, it's mentioned by me. Again, it was mentioned by my predecessor. You do not run an organisation like this with the responsibilities this organisation has in Northern Ireland to public tranquility and safety with 1-year settlements of budgets. This is about, even if I may say, the paramilitary problems that exist. We need to have a strategic approach that's funded so that we can actually plan for these issues and we can deal with them with partners. So, I'm going to open up because I know lots of our organisation, members of our organisation, do so much voluntary work in this space, but we need to have budgets that are mainstreamed and that are more than 1 year to allow us to do meaningful interventions and give people off ramps away from crime. And I'm afraid at the moment that's not an area that we are able to fund in the way that you would want us to and I would want us to. But I'll open it up, Bobby. Any thoughts?
I think you've largely covered it, Chief. I mean, I would just re-emphasize, like we think prevention is absolutely key in what we do. It's not just a statutory function for us. It's also well understood that, you know, prevention is always better than the cure. I mean, you'll know about the work that happens. Everybody will be aware of the work that happens within neighbourhood policing teams, but there's so much more of that. And I think you've seen that firsthand as well in terms of some of the interventions that Mel's teams do through the armed response units, roads policing as well. So the desire and the will is absolutely there to do more in the preventative space. Our issue is around capacity, as the Chief said. And it does go back to the fundamental issue around headcount. And if we don't have enough officers and we don't have the right budget, then the capacity to be able to do this kind of work is absolutely affected by that. We see that in terms of abstractions of neighbourhood officers, but also these other teams. And whilst there's welcome news today around recruitment, again, we need to be realistic about that. We're not going to see those boots on the ground, if you like, until really the end of this year. So it will remain a priority for us, but that will have to be somehow achieved against this backdrop of really significant pressure all across the entire organisation because of the funding situation.
Okay, okay, thank you. And I'm going to move to Joanne now on vetting and preparedness of recruits. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Chief, first of all, can I congratulate you and commend all of your officers because there are significant results in the report. Really good work being done, despite the pressures and the financial pressures that you're under. And I think it's important that we put that on the record. My first question relates to the vetting of recruits. Are you satisfied that the current vetting is sifting out those who should not be recruited into the PSNI? And my second question is on this area is the HMIC report. Your response to that suggests that you will implement the recommendations by September 2024. However, you're due to recruit in April. So how are you going to square that circle? That's my first question.
So I will hand over to Pamela. What I would say is the HMIC were complementary with regards to how we deal with vetting, and nobody is more conscious than I of the need for rigorous vetting. And you only have to look at what happened in the Metropolitan Police over a period of time. And I'm not criticising the Met. It was a force I spent 27 years in. But if you don't get vetting right, you create a problem throughout the organisation, throughout a long period of time. The people that we will be recruiting in April and the foreseeable cohorts have all been through a process of selection. So we have in the pipeline a group waiting to come in. I'm sure Pamela can explain the process that they've been through to hopefully provide you with the reassurances that you need.
I'll come in quickly, Joanne, from the scale of it, and I suppose our process, but vetting obviously sits with Chris and PSD, so we can clarify that for you. But as the Chief says, with regards to the intake that we're looking at, certainly in the first quarter, those pre-employment checks and vetting processes have been concluded in line with our current approach, I suppose, I think is your question. I suppose the challenge is the extent to which you feel that is working and satisfactory and so forth. So that's done. I was keen to ensure that I had assurance that for the remainder of the year, when you start to dial up recruitment, you do put pressure into the whole of the organisation again and making sure that we have the capacity in the right places to get that done. So I'm satisfied with regards to the resource and vetting to respond to us to be able to bring the student intake in is absolutely there, but maybe just more from a vetting process. I'll hand to Chris.
Thank you. Yes, so obviously the recruitment process, as Pamela described, is one part, but the vetting of those individuals sits within Professional Standards Department and the responsibility to support that. So the HMIC report did highlight that there's a lot of good work going on in that department, but it also highlights that we can't be complacent about that. And one of the important things to remember about vetting is it's only a test for a moment in time, really. So we vet people before they join the organisation, and then we have to continually vet people throughout their service because circumstances change, and that's been highlighted by a number of very high-profile cases across policing across the UK in recent years. So we're confident that we have good processes in place. We'll never be complacent because there's always more that we can be doing, and we need to make sure that the staffing and resourcing in there experiencing the same pressures as the rest of the organisation is sufficient to enable us not just to vet those recruits that are joining the organisation, to ensure that the vetting is refreshed on a regular basis to maintain that confidence.
Thank you. And briefly, I just want to speak about the training and preparedness of probationers who are leaving Garnerville. I do have some concerns around that, bearing in mind that these new officers, their training has been condensed significantly, and they now have to run towards danger while the rest of us are running away. Do you consider that they are emerging from Garnerville adequately prepared with the dangers that they're, and the horrors, frankly, that some of them will face on our streets? And what do you think could be done differently and better?
So it's an interesting question, because I'm trying to think when I came out and walked the streets the first time, and you probably always feel a bit of imposter syndrome, and are you really prepared for what might happen? And I think that, by the way, that visits you throughout your police service when you first become a detective, when you first become a sergeant. Have I got what it takes to look after this team? So I will look at the training, Joanne, and look at how we are preparing our staff. One of the things I am determined to do is make sure that this organisation, and there were people outside as I walked in here today who I spoke to, that this organisation feels supported and feels able, individuals, to put their hand up if they're struggling, because that's was once said to me by a colleague, it's a sign of weakness if you put your hand up. And I said that is not right. It's a sign of strength if you put your hand up. That the men and women of this organisation, wherever they are, but obviously those young recruits who come and face all those challenges on our streets, that they feel they can speak out if they, in any way they're struggling, and we give them the support they need. I've not been through in this organisation yet the experience of recruitment process and looking at how the training is done, but I will visit them. So my plan is always to visit each cohort and speak to them about the values, what this organisation is about, what we're seeking to do, who we are, why we're here. So all I can tell you is that we will do everything that you would expect us to do. And what I've seen from the college, the professionalism, the staff that are responsible for the training are incredibly impressive. I have actually got the College of Policing Chief Executive, Chief Constable Andy Marsh, is going to come over to see our college. I don't think we've been as closely connected in recent years with the College of Policing as we perhaps should have been. So that's perhaps an area I'll get Andy to have a look at. But I would hope we are preparing them properly. But I'll open that up to the team, Bobby.
Yeah, I'm conscious Claire might want to come in and speak a bit more about the Garnerville piece. But I mean, I think it's always been the case that, training is training, and then there's a requirement to adjust to the kind of real world. So that's going to be picked up, as it always has been within local policing. But we're already having conversations within our management team about how best to support people in that transition from the learning environment into the real world. We do have probationary support officers. Some of our thinking is around trying to consolidate them perhaps in our neighbourhood teams to try and give people the best possible support as they make that transition from the kind of theoretical to the real world. So it's something we are alive to, and we want to see everybody succeed in policing. So this is really us putting our minds to making sure that we give them the best chance to do that.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Just a little bit to add. So we do continually review the delivery model and the content of the student officer development programme, just to identify any learnings, both from student officer feedback and also through that probationary experience. Bobby has talked about how we continue to support officers once they leave Garnerville for those 2 years, and that's critical. A key part of the development programme is scenario based and as real life experience as we can give them as well. So it is not simply classroom based learning in order to prepare officers for going out to the districts. And I think part of your question, Joanne, was about have we identified anything that we could improve on to equip officers better. I think we're aware that, you know, there are two things that we've identified to date. One is that resilience building. So we've built in some development around, you know, building a more resilient workforce and dealing with trauma, because they will experience very difficult calls and tend at difficult scenes. So we've built that into the programme. And the other that actually we've been developing again in partnership with the strategic community engagement team is, you know, equipping officers for policing and working with more diverse communities, and so that they feel confident and have information to do that. So those are two areas that I suppose we've identified already and are developing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to John and a question around the impact of current resources on issues.
Chair, thank you, and to Constable, thank you for your report today. There's been a recurring theme, and rightly so, around resources, and I want to thank you and the members of your senior team who joined myself and Alliance colleagues to discuss some of these matters in more detail a few days ago, and other matters also. But the question I want to ask today is around the neighbourhood and local policing picture, and how in reality numbers are being depleted in our local areas across Northern Ireland, and all of the challenges, of course, that brings. So I suppose I want to know what consideration is being given to the depletion of those numbers, and how we continue to provide that vital local service in a way that is safe and sustainable for both police and public. So I will obviously bring in Bobby. It's a difficult one because the police operating model, any police operating model, should not be decided by a budget. Okay, we're in a position where we are, and obviously I don't want to be boring, but I welcome the prospect that we are going to get funding to help us in what is probably the worst financial position it is the worst financial position this organisation's ever been in. To reassure you as best as I can, and we've had these conversations as a senior executive team, and I have seen the consequence of taking out neighbourhood policing, which has happened in the UK because of the severe cuts that occurred to policing there. The consequences are long felt. Once you move out those communities where there are paramilitaries, once you've not got boots on the ground, eyes and ears, understanding what those organisations are doing and who they are doing it to, working with partners to prevent those activities, when you withdraw from those communities because you've become a responsive organisation as opposed to a proactive and preventative organisation, which is neighbourhood policing, it takes an incredible amount of time to recover that position, those relationships, that local community intelligence. So whatever if the executive position wasn't to be resolved, if we were to get a budget that left us, you know, in the trajectory that we currently are, we are still talking about maintaining a local policing footprint. But that gets harder and harder and harder. And the difficulty with that is the abstractions of those officers for other things. And we have lots of other things to deal with here, which we should celebrate. Events. It's a vibrant country. Northern Ireland as an area gets lots of visits by very important people that we have to police, lots of sporting events that we have to police. So the abstraction comes from those communities, and that is incredibly challenging when local communities are expecting those local police officers to be there and they're not there for 3 or 4 days, and that creates a lack of trust. And I had a conversation with a family about this last week from Carrickfergus. So we are alive to it, we really are, but there's a limited amount I can tell you other than the strategic assurance that we do not and will not pull back from neighbourhood policing, but the numbers will be consummate with the budget. Okay, Bobby, can I bring you in?
Yeah, sure, Chief. So, I mean, technically, on paper, there are 650 neighbourhood officers. And again, that's still comparatively, if you looked over like a 10, 15-year period, it's still comparatively high number of people in theory. The difficulty that we have linked to the budget is the combination of not enough headcount, simply don't have enough police officers to be able to staff what is the local policing model, if I can describe it as that. We might be as many as 363 people short. And what that means is that we're having to significantly abstract from neighbourhood teams. And I've heard myself, neighbourhood teams, I know you speak to them all the time as well, but people are reporting that as many as 2 out of every 3 duties, they're the subject of some form of abstraction. We've said this before, partnership committee, and in this meeting, the risk that we run is that we end up with neighbourhood policing really only in name only. It's massively frustrating for the officers themselves. I mean, these are people who are really passionate about community policing. And I know that they personally feel like they're letting communities down, that they're having to break promises, that they can't meet those commitments. And it is the flip side, if you like, of the ownership, the investment and the commitment that they bring to the work that they do, that they themselves feel quite beaten up about this. Look, in terms of what the chief said, you know, it's welcome to hear that. It's welcome to hear today the piece on recruitment. That will definitely help. We're continuing to have conversations internally to see what we can possibly do within the budget that we're granted in order to limit the amount of abstractions. But the Criminal Justice Inspectorate have already looked at this and will say in coming months that this abstraction issue has become a defining factor, regrettably, of community policing here. So we'll continue to fight for it because we're passionate about it and we believe in it and we know the difference that it can make. And we recognise that there's a false economy here in the sense that whilst we continue to live within the constraints of our budget, there's a massive opportunity cost by not having these officers on the ground.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to,
Sorry, Chair, can I come in with a supplementary question to that, if that's
Okay,
possible?
quickly, yes.
And all of that is welcome, and the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee actually identifying 7,500 and so on. Just at the moment in time when things may change around the decision making around that, could you say something about multi-annual budgeting and how, especially in response to Kate's question, I think as well, how if you got a budget over a few years rather than 1 year, that would make a difference to strategic planning, because that's something that happens elsewhere, and it seems to me could happen here if the decision was taken.
So that was highlighted again in the HMIC report around the fact that we're unable, because of the restrictions of 1 year budget settlements, to plan and forecast our business, and that includes obviously with partners. It's something that I've raised. People will know I'm constantly speaking to very senior stakeholders all over the place. I'm lobbying hard for us to get almost a pay settlement that would allow us to reassure our staff that they're going to get their increment awards for the next 3 years. So that provides more certainty for them. You know, if we look after our workforce properly, they will look after Northern Ireland properly. Strategically, to run an organisation of circa 800 million pounds with 1 year settlements is frankly ridiculous. We can't. You will be aware of certain opportunities in England and Wales around reserves that don't exist with us as well. There are other opportunities to get funding from different budgets that become available in England and Wales that we can't access. The money that is set aside for policing in Northern Ireland doesn't necessarily reach the police in Northern Ireland because decisions are taken in the interim to put it elsewhere. So even money that is meant for us, we don't get. So I am asking the question about why we can't have 3-5 year pay settlements. And I'm asking that question of people who are currently in government, who may be in the future government, and local parties here, because I think we almost need like a pay review with regards to our public services about how we allocate those spends, because I'm also unsighted on what the mechanism is for allocating those spends. So I think the current position with the executive presents a huge opportunity because of what we've suffered over the last couple of years, and this isn't the first time it's occurred, to look at how we can safeguard public services and funding in the event of similar circumstances happening again. And people seem to be listening. Whether that transitions into any actual action and a shift in how we're funded, so there's a more medium view with inflationary pressures, etc. I don't know, but that is a sensible and mature way to do business with an organisation this large. So I would welcome that discussion. But a sort of spending review for public services here, I think, is needed. Do you want to add to that, Tom, or not?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. We've touched on this, and we've touched on all the places. I mean, even Fiscal Council and others. I mean, I think it's just an organisation of this size to try and deliver in year. And I've shared with you before the amount of work to replan and remodel an organisation of our size, just because budgets are reduced. And then 3 years later, you're effectively trying to undo that and go back to where you were 3 years prior is just deeply impactful to the organisation. We touch on it from pay, but actually the full resource budget to have a 3 to 5 year vision that you can actually plan and work to from your operating model perspective, and indeed capital. There's lots of transformational change within even our estate and sustainability that we could do. And with certainty of knowing what your budget was in 2 and 3 years' time, you could take very different decisions than you take when you're looking at an in-year picture. So 100% for us, if we had the foresight, it would enable us to do some of the transformational change that could actually save us some of our revenue money to then, even invest in the headcount side of it. But when you're doing that in a 12-month period, it's just not achievable. So absolutely, please.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to move to Les on a question on journalism and surveillance.
Thanks, Chief Constable. The board had requested a formal report on whether PSNI had undertaken any form of surveillance of journalists or lawyers in the past few years. That was in part in the light of the case taken by a journalist at the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is still being undertaken. We'd liaised with your colleagues on how that could be provided without prejudice to that case. So my question really is, when will we get that information, as it's now 5 months since it was asked for?
So this might be one I need to talk about later. I'm welcome to bring the team in. I met Sir Brian Leveson last week, who is our IPCO chair, around how we are governed and overseen around the intrusive tactics that we are able to deploy to keep people safe, that are all done extremely proportionately and carefully. You will know this is my background, and I can absolutely assure you that, and I'm already looking at this area quite carefully, some of what I've seen, applications that might come in, do not necessarily succeed. I'm not going to talk about individual cases because that would not be right. It would not be right to talk about a case that the IPT may still be considering. What I would say is my conversation with Sir Brian was extremely positive. We have our next inspection in April. I'll be seeing his inspector who will be coming to do that. I know a number of the judges, and I think they see the PSNI as a best in class with regards to our covert tactics and the authorization process that's in place. But we're not complacent. So, this is an area, as you do know, Les, is very close to my heart. There's always that trade-off around privacy against security. I know there is a case that you refer to involving journalists. The legislation provides protection for journalistic material. We are very respectful of journalistic material. I think there has been criticism of decisions made here in the past. I think that was actually another force that was involved in that decision making. It was the same case. But please be assured that this is an area that we would only authorize intrusive tactics into people's private lives where they are properly justified and those cases are properly reviewed. I'm happy to speak to you offline about any specifics you have concerns about.
Okay, very briefly, just to be clear, the information we're looking for is not about individual cases and individual decisions, but is about the broader principle of how often you are doing it and the broad terms of the basis on which you're doing it, rather than a specific case about a specific individual. I think we want a sense of how often this is deployed and the kind of in principle bases that you're doing it. So just to be clear on that.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm happy to deal with that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Nuala around protests and police numbers.
Thank you, Chair. It was really following on from John and Peter's question, and in particular, the number of 7,500 that we've heard since Patton in terms of the number of officers. Would you agree, Chief Constable, that number is actually sufficient in the current context, not only of population, but also in terms of the Northern Ireland situation, that should we actually be reviewing and looking at what the new number of police officers should be for us to have an adequate service and protect the public?
So I don't agree with the figure of 7,500. I think it's more. So the work that I mentioned, that there is a framework for officer numbers for police forces provided by a consultancy firm, Crest, who are very well respected. They say it's 3.88 officers per 1,000 population. They actually revised that down in light of the cost of living crisis. So it is, if you like, a figure set in the current financial climate that we'll have to face. So it's a current and contemporary figure. That gives us just under 7,400 officers, but that would be for a force that doesn't face the sorts of challenges that we face. So if you look at capital city issues, the Met gets effectively a capital city allowance. We don't get any such allowance for all the different and diverse challenges we face, whether that's national security or otherwise, or paramilitaries. We don't get such an allowance. We get some additional security funding that's supposed to be match funded and has been a flat budget for a number of years. And that's built into our budget. So we have, and I spoke to an organisation yesterday to get a second organisation in to look at how, as an independent perspective, we go to the executive with a number of officers that we need to recruit so that we can provide the policing services that you would get in GB with the challenges that you face in Northern Ireland. And at the moment, there has been a dilution, a reduction in our police capabilities over time. We haven't kept pace. And that's something to do, I think, with how we have or have not managed to get the allocation of budget that we need. So I'm saying, I'm calling time on that. We have got to get the funding that this organisation needs. I think, you know, I'm going to say it once more because it's important, I think, for the organisation to know my position on this. I am determined to pay them that pay award. I'm determined. I will go to court over it. I might lose, but they deserve that money. I'm hoping now recent events mean I won't have to do that because that's not the interest of anybody or public money. But something has to give here. With regards to the actual numbers, if we pay them what they should be paid, regards to the actual numbers, I mentioned earlier, I think it's probably close to 8,000. But Crest, the advisory company who've done some multipliers for forces with specific challenges like Northern Ireland and PSNI, looking at their work, it'd be another 1,100 officers. So you're looking at 8,600 officers. Now that, and when Patton did his work, of course, there were 300,000 people less here than there are now. So there's lots of evidence, there's lots of factors, and we are presenting this evidence. I want to assure you we're lobbying with this, and we will have that multiply work done in the next week or two to go to the Justice Minister with a very clear position about what we need. The next problem there, though, is we can only recruit so many people through the college in 1 year. I know we're aiming to bring in around about 350 in the next 12 months to keep the officer numbers that we've gone down to, because we simply can't go any lower. But we need to increase, and that presents huge challenges. But I want to plan about how we increase over the next 2 or 3 years to the numbers that we need to have. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 more questions. Before I go to Janet and Trevor, I'm going to go to Mark, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question the Chief Constable can't answer. I don't know, probably yourself, Chris. I'll dispense with the preamble. Can the board be advised when the Canova report will be released?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. Yes, so you'll be aware that the report has been written. It sits with us. We've confirmed before there's no changes or reductions to that report. It is as authored. It's an independent report. The responsibilities are then passed to myself now as the chair of our strategic management board to decide on factors such as publication. That's, as you say, the chief has had to recuse himself of that responsibility as the author of that report. This board dictated that would be the process that we should follow, and that's what we're doing. We're also very mindful that there is a protocol that's been written by the Operation Canova team itself, which stipulates the conditions that need to be met before publication, and we're working through that very carefully. Without going into the detail, one of the primary considerations there is that we need to satisfy ourselves that there's no prejudice to any ongoing investigations with the PPS. So working very closely with the Director of Public Prosecutions and working very closely with the head of the Canova team now, we have come to a position where, notwithstanding there are still some decisions to be made on crucial investigations by PPS, we understand what their timelines are. We also understand that the best thing for justice and for the families is to understand what those decisions are first and foremost, followed by the publication of the report, but balancing that with the unsettling nature of the uncertainty around the publication that will undoubtedly have on those families and victims, and the need to provide transparency and be clear and give some reassurance around the publication. So I have now got agreement with the DPP and with the head of the Canova team that we can move to publication on the 8th of March this year. And obviously, as we approach that date, we will give further detail and more discussion will be had at that point. But we are working towards the 8th of March for publication.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It is important this is done swiftly, but obviously it's also important it's done sensibly and sensitively. But the PSNI, you don't anticipate or even imagine any further hoops or hurdles that could be introduced at this stage from anyone?
No, we will continue to work through as a board around the implications for us as a service, obviously, but by giving that clarity today, we are saying that is our intention, 8th of March. The DPP is aware that I'm saying that publicly today, and the head of the Operation Canova team is aware that I'm saying that publicly today as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Janet on knife crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable and team, for the report. My question is about the increase in knife crime, and quite frankly, it scares the wits out of me. But I read somewhere recently that 76% of all crime in England is knife related. And so just recently, the laws around knife crime were strengthened. I'm just wondering, is that something that you see or would envisage, coming here, being extended to here, even as a preventative measure? Thank you.
Sorry, I actually just missed about the legislation. So could you just repeat the question again? Sorry, Janet, that's my fault.
No problem. It's just really about the increase in knife crime, and apparently in England the laws on knife crime have just been strengthened, and wondering, is that something you would envision for here, that strengthening of law being extended to us, rolled out just even as a preventative measure? Thank you.
So knife crime, historically where I worked, has been a huge problem. Now I'm going to look to my left and right here, and I read everything put in front of me around our challenges, and I don't want to say something that's going to cause it to change. Knife crime doesn't seem to present the challenges here. I mentioned this is one of the safest places to live in the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is, statistically. We don't see the same issues. We have other real significant challenges that those forces who have knife crime issues, mainly metropolitan type forces, face. I perhaps open up to Bobby and Mark. I don't think it's something that we are particularly focused on looking to adopt any new legislation, but can I ask Bobby and then Mark on that one?
Yes, I think you're right on the legislation point. It obviously links back to Kate's point earlier on, just about specifically the preventative work that's being taken forward through Operation Support Department and through the Armed Response Unit. I don't know if Mel will want to say a bit specifically about the campaign that they've done. It is a concern, and it also feeds across into the kind of operational challenges and threats that exist for officers. And having just been the duty officer over the last weekend, there were 2 incidents just in this weekend alone where local policing team officers had to deal with persons carrying knives that presented a threat to them. Circumstances where we did task our armed response unit, but it took them a significant period of time to get there. So it does present very real risks and operational challenges to us. It is a concern in terms of, in particular, young people and their carries of them. And we continue to work both as an organisation and a joined up fashion and with our partners to do everything we can to address it. But fortunately, we don't yet see the extent of the problem that you would see in other parts of the United Kingdom, but we're not complacent about that either.
Okay, John. John, Mel?
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you, Chair. Thank you, Janet. Just to add to what's already been said, certainly, you know, police and legislation doesn't police our way out of an issue. What's really important, I think, is the efforts that are put into prevention and early intervention. And certainly, I know there are board members here who've seen the benefit of the guns and knives presentation that my armed response teams deliver. And that work really working across all the partnerships into school settings, into youth settings, and changing mindsets and winning hearts and minds on young people is a much better outcome than legislating and putting particularly young people into the criminal justice system when there was a different way to approach it. If we saw a trend around certain types of knives, because every knife is dangerous in the wrong hands, it's around the use of the knife rather than the type of the knife. But if we saw types of knives becoming a particular problem, then we would, of course, consider and advocate around legislative change that would restrict or reduce or remove the sale of those knives into communities or to certain parts of communities. But for me, the most effective way is the prevention angle.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Janet, you had a reflection on road safety. Do you want to, just briefly on it, just a reflection?
Thank you. And Chief, last year saw 71 deaths on our roads, an 8-year high. And quite frankly, it's the standard of driving, especially in the rural roads, is absolutely appalling. I live in the country, and although I no longer drive, you'd be very glad to hear. But, you know, the standard of driving and the biggest bone of contention in my village and the surrounding areas is the dreadful standard of the driving, because in narrow winding roads, you're getting constantly drivers straddling the middle of the road, more often than not on the wrong side, and they don't know when to dip headlights during, you know, darkness. They don't know when to dip them, so that they blind the oncoming drivers. But I really welcome the setup of the new Road Safety Strategic Forum, and with the blue light services and 3 of the departments. I think it's a brilliant idea, and hopefully this will address a lot of road safety issues, and look forward to the progress from that. But could I just ask that rural driving especially, and the standard of driving, is kept high on the agenda? Thank you.
Okay.
I'll hand to Mel. I'll briefly say, obviously, I mentioned to board members before, the guards and ourselves are very conscious of the number of killed and seriously injured young people on our roads. The guards have seen an increase. We've seen an increase. There are 5 distraction causes we know around this work. We're also, together with the guards, looking at a couple of the roads trusts, charities to come over to look at what we're doing to see if there's stuff in GB that would help us. I have to say, from a remote examination of what's happening in Northern Ireland, they've been very complimentary about our data. They think is better than in GB. I was very pleased with the comments I got around the Christmas visibility on our roads. You know, and that went through rural communities, villages, towns, all as a deterrent around antisocial driving, if I can describe it like that. But it's something, you know, because of the loss of life and the serious injuries that are involved, it's something that we do have as a priority, Janet, I can assure you of that. But I'll hand you over to Mel, who can perhaps add to that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable. Yeah, I think it's been a really positive step. The formation of the Strategic Road Safety Partnership, which is currently being chaired by us, the PSNI. As you rightly said, Janet, the number of 71 fatalities on the roads last year was an 8-year high. Across that 71 fatalities, there is no one obvious thing, which is where we would focus our attention. There are a range of things. Hopefully most members have seen the Fatal 5 marketing campaign. And hopefully most of you have seen the restart of the TV advertising campaign, which has certainly been very impactful in the past and very powerful. As the Chief has said, we are working really closely with the guards, and we are also focusing our days of action, our obstacle reference days, where we're getting as much visibility as we can around roads policing issues, and certainly around the border and working across the border as well. So that will continue. And then 2 particular areas of work that we're currently rolling out is Operation Safer Steps, which is aimed at trying to reduce pedestrian fatalities and casualties, and also Operation Lifesaver, which is aimed at reducing speeding incidents on the roads, which can both be huge contributory factors around fatalities.
Thank you. Nuala, you wanted to thank you, Janet. You wanted quick.
Yeah, just in terms of the doing everything on the media and the speculation that we will have the restored executive on Saturday. It's important that that happens and it's peaceful and things are allowed to continue as should do in a democratic society. But we've all seen there's been also speculation of protests tomorrow too, blocking of roads. And I wonder, Chief Constable, if you would be able to comment on the situation for tomorrow and indeed Saturday.
Yeah, of course. So listen, I'm aware of some of the social media material that's going out. What we are not seeing, and I'd appeal to everybody to conduct themselves properly and within the law. There is ample opportunity through a democratic process to express your views. And that's something that we all advocate towards. We actually are not seeing, and we spoke about this as a team this morning. It was a conversation that I instigated around some of the social media material. We're not actually seeing that this is going to be a thing, that this is actually going to happen. I'm almost nervous to say that. By me saying it, it might mean that people think, oh, I'm going to do this. But with the police, and I have seen London brought to a standstill by protesters. It doesn't do their cause any good, actually, because, you know, people can't get to cancer appointments. People can't get to see loved ones who, you know, are ill. That sort of disruption isn't in the interests of any of the communities in Northern Ireland. So I'd appeal for people to act responsibly, to behave within the law, and to allow us then to just get on with the difficult enough job that we've already got. But if they do break the law, we will deal with them. Okay. Let democratic process take its course. But I think there's been some very, which I welcome, sensible voices saying, no, this isn't the way to do things, and this isn't going to happen. That includes from the community who might not agree with recent decisions. There have been some voices of reason, which I welcome. And I hope the next few days passes off without any implications for the PSNI. But obviously, we will be out there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And our last question to Trevor, and data breach, and then I think support for mental health support for officers, and possibly one other extension question. Thank you.
I never know, mate. You've got more when I'm speaking. Thanks, Chief Constable. Your report has been very good. I mean, I think Joanne referenced that. I mean, commend the officers in relation to that. I suppose there's one part jumps out of me is Sleep Gullion. Now, it's far from my constituency, but it's clearly in a Northern Ireland context. Sleep Gullion has featured a number of times now, and I asked you specifically a number of months ago about who you believe was behind some of this. I mean, we've looked at drugs now, we've looked at guns, we've looked at police cars being damaged. There's clearly something concentrated in that Sleep Gullion area. So I'd like to know maybe more around that in terms of what your assessment of that is. I'm going to roll these questions all in to, just for the benefit of time for the board. The data breach supported officers, there's reference in your report about the £500 payments to each of the officers and staff. I'm just wondering what the uptake has been like in relation to that. And then whenever you were referencing the Codry families, and I mean, I welcome the fact that you went and met them, and I think that's very good. But you did emphasise about the mental health aspect of some of these cases. Your own officers are suffering from mental health issues. I raised this prior to your arrival here with the previous Chief Constable about the frustration of many of the officers about getting adequate support, particularly those people who are often long-term sick with various illnesses, and many of those relate to mental health. So I'm sure some of them will listen to your comments today about the importance of tackling mental health. But I suppose what I would be thinking, if I was one of them, what are you going to do now that you're head of the organisation in relation to the police service? What are you going to do to support those officers adequately to either get them back to work or actually allow them to retire?
So I will start with Sleep Gullion and your question about that particular area. With regards to the large drug seizure, the biggest drug seizure actually that we've had in Northern Ireland, the £10 million value of cocaine. And it's an ongoing case. There is obviously prosecution underway for that, and there's more work being done on that. I don't see any community background concern about that particular case. I'll check that, I'll come back to you, but I don't think that is an issue that's present in that. I think those drugs were almost certainly for Northern Ireland, and as you may be aware, with some of the incidents that we've had in the last 12 months, there's been a coming together of different factions previously who would have been on different sides of the divide. So I don't see that as an issue, but I'll go away and check that. So the absolute answer is I don't know, but I don't believe there's an issue there. And I'm happy to talk to you off table about any particular area where you've got concerns that we can let you know what we know and what we're doing to focus and target on particular groups. Okay. With regards to the data breach, we've got the data on the take-up of the universal offer. So I'll probably I'm looking at Chris and looking at Pamela, but Pamela's probably got that information. But if I just go to the last one, the last question, then I'll return to Pamela to deal with that. We're going to have a series of seminars, team PSNI based, building on the cultural audit. What I've asked for, and Claire is leading this work and doing a good job in corralling it together, is that we set out for our workforce, firstly, the recognition of what they do, the incidents they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I know I don't need to set out for this group what those are, but just briefly, you know, police officers and police staff see things they shouldn't see when they're dealing with paedophilia online, when they go to tragic car accidents that, you know, Janet was talking about, driving behaviours and over 70 people killed. Our officers have to go and deal with that. They have to go and speak to the families of the people involved in those accidents. Sometimes that's children involved in those accidents. They have to deal with people who have life-changing injuries in those accidents. Our officers have to deal with mental health crisis. I talked about it was 2 female officers who went into Refoil and got quite badly assaulted. The list of things that create trauma, stress, suffering to our officers is almost endless. What we don't have in place, and I think every organisation or every policing organisation would accept this, is sufficient remedies and support to deal with those. We don't. But we are determined to do everything we can do within the budgetary concessions that we have to provide services to support those officers. I also recognise, by the way, a number of officers who left the organisation I've spoken to, who said they never got any support, and some who said that they felt they couldn't, as I mentioned earlier, put their hand up for help because of the stigma, if you like, of doing that. There's not a stigma there. That is what I need to take away and remove that stigma so people feel that they can come forward. But we need to be able to provide them with help. There was an extremely positive attendance management workshop earlier this week where some incredibly good ideas were coming off the page. And what it did show is that this organisation is determined to look after this organisation. Now, I can't comment on what's happened before, but this is one of those challenges that, particularly because of what officers and staff have to encounter, is something that we've just got to constantly work at. But I want everybody to understand that it's okay not to be okay. And I've seen the finest police officers, the most resilient individuals I've ever met, fall, psychologically fall. And these are people you'd never expect that from. So look, this can affect any of us. I'm very conscious of the senior team. I'm conscious of our senior managers, but I'm especially conscious of the rank and file out there 24 hours a day doing the work that they do. So it's something that it's a priority for us. It comes to a certain extent from the cultural audit as well, but it also comes from just walking around and listening to people walking the floors. So it is a focus of ours. I want to assure you that. And I spoke to the people who are outside this building when I came in, who I'm meeting, I think, next month. I want to meet them to listen to their stories, to see how we can help them. And there is a retired or retiring element to this as well with regards to ill health, that we need to provide them with the support and fast track these people out so that they don't face the additional psychological dilemma hit of having to wait for things to happen that should happen. Okay. But yeah, I want to reassure you, it's something we're very focused on as a team. We've all talked about it as a team. But I'll hand you over to Pamela, if I may.
Hopefully quite a straightforward answer for you, Trevor. So at the end of January, it was just before Christmas when we went out to our organisation to support them in how they could claim through that universal offering. So to date, we've had just over 1,000 claims, and the cost of that's coming in the region of £400,000. So that's about £400 people are and we anticipated this, some people will already have some measures that they're satisfied with, and this was giving them additional assurance. We can see there's 350 claims sort of in progress, but not finalised. So we'll expect to see those coming through this month. And the workforce has got to the end of March to get all those in. So we are quite time constrained within the budgetary year, back to our earlier conversation, to close that down. But there's been a reasonable uptake to date. I don't know if Claire wants to come in. Do you want to come in on the mental health stuff?
Yeah, maybe just to provide a little bit more detail on the services and the support we give to officers experiencing any type of psychological condition. So, we know that of our sickness absence, the top reason for that are those who have commenced our ill health retirement process, and we need to support them, as you've heard, through that as quickly as possible. And those who then, the second reason is those who are suffering from some type of psychological condition. We have a range of services at the front end, obviously focusing on prevention and early intervention. And you've heard me talking about our resilience building initiatives and helping our officers be prepared to deal with maybe the traumatic incidents or difficult incidents and work that they have to do. Our OHW service is both an assessment service and a treatment service. So we are offering treatment, and indeed we're offering treatment particularly for psychological conditions quicker than the health service, but still not quickly enough. And that's because we've got demand increasing and resources decreasing or flat. And indeed, it is extremely difficult for us to recruit psychologists to deliver those services. And indeed, they are one of those populations that you've heard the Chief talking about who have outstanding pay awards for multiple years. So it will be very difficult for us to recruit from a very small pool of qualified psychologists whenever that's the case. So we're very clear that we need to, you know, continue to invest in those services to support and provide treatment to officers in a timely fashion. We're also working with other partners so that we can contract out different options for officers. So there will be different ways for people to access services depending on the treatment that they may require, and working with partners to see how we can find quicker solutions to that.
Thank you, Claire. I mean, I know you've said some of that. I mean, I appreciate what has been done in the past. But I suppose what I'm saying to you directly, John, is, and I think you've acknowledged there is difficulties, as has Claire. Just because the health service don't offer a good service doesn't mean that the police service shouldn't try harder. I mean, clearly you have a duty of care to the officers. Clearly, it's one of the things that they continue complaining to us about as elected representatives, that they feel failed. I'm not saying they have been failed, but they feel failed. And we need to change that perception. We need to do, I mean, it's a case of we need to do more. But what I'm hearing in your response today is you are prepared to do more. So I think we need to give time to see how this rolls out, not taking away from the work that's been done on the front end of this, but it's the people who have actually resulted as from some of the things that you've said. But I mean, thank you for those answers.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Chief Constable, and to you and your team for taking the questions, which were across a broad range of areas, which you've had to take. And thank you for your answers and for your ongoing work on behalf of the community. I mean, on the positive end, we've the possibility of an assembly and possibility of a justice minister and some legislative change that needs to happen. And again, we've seen very serious reports in terms of Northern Ireland Affairs Committee on the report on organised crime in society. And policing is key to a safe and stable society. So I want to thank you again. To the people online and to the people in the room, thank you very much for attending today. And our next meeting will be on the 7th of March. Thank you. Yep.